Have you ever been made to feel ungrateful for something you never even received? This is the story of Isabella, a young woman who spent years living in silence, in a basement she never chose, while her own father built his future off the gift that was meant to start hers. What happens when the truth finally surfaces at a family brunch? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about reclaiming your voice, your worth, and the life you were told you didn't deserve. The sun filtered gently through the tall windows of the restaurant on Michigan Avenue, catching the edge of silverware and champagne flutes. It was supposed to be a celebration, a quiet, elegant brunch for Walter Grant's 78th birthday. Linen napkins, classical jazz in the background. 3 generations of the Grant family gathered at a long white tablecloth table, smiles rehearsed, pleasantries practiced. Isabella sat near the far end, 2 seats away from the edge. Between her and the breadbasket was her younger sister, Maddie, scrolling on her phone. Across from her, her parents chatted with an uncle about property values in the suburbs. She had just taken a sip of orange juice when it happened. Her grandfather, dressed in his best navy blazer, raised his mimosa. "My dear Bella," he said, voice warm and booming, "I'm so glad you've been enjoying the apartment I got you after college. I heard it even has a skylight." The glass in her hand trembled. The juice scorched her throat as it went down the wrong way. She choked, not from the taste, but from the words. Every head turned toward her. Her mother's perfectly lined lips parted in confusion. Her sister's phone lowered, and her father, Martin, dropped his fork. The clink of metal on porcelain sounded louder than it should have. For half a second, no one moved. Then Isabella spoke. "I live in a basement," she said, her voice soft but steady, eyes fixed on the napkin in her lap. The room didn't breathe. "I never got an apartment," she continued, lifting her gaze slowly to meet her grandfather's eyes. "I never even heard of one." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice the air. Walter blinked, his hand still mid-toast. "What?" "I've been living under a staircase next to a furnace," she said clearly now, "with peeling walls and one window the size of a shoebox." Her mother looked from her to Martin, visibly disoriented. Walter lowered his glass, his expression falling into something like horror. No, I wired $65,000 to your father, right after graduation. He said you were all settled in, that you were happy." Isabella gave a hollow laugh. "I've been paying rent in cash to a landlady who thinks Wi-Fi is a government conspiracy. I eat dinner sitting on the floor. Sometimes the boiler leaks and it drips next to my bed." Her voice didn't tremble, not anymore. Martin shifted in his seat, face pale. I was going to—" "You weren't," she interrupted, calm, controlled. "You told me to work harder. You said I shouldn't expect handouts. That struggle would build character." A gasp came from somewhere down the table. Walter sat down slowly, like someone had just punched the wind out of him. His knuckles whitened on the tablecloth. He stared at Martin, speechless. "I wasn't going to say anything today," Isabella said as she stood, her hands still slightly shaking. "But since we're here, and celebrating, maybe it's time we stop pretending." Chairs scraped the floor as she walked out. No one called her back. In the hallway, her heels echoed against the tile, each step fueled by rage that had fermented for years. Behind her, the brunch table sat frozen in shame. And for once in her life, the silence didn't belong to her. The cab ride back to Southside was quiet. Isabella leaned her head against the cool window, watching as the upscale storefronts and tree-lined streets of downtown gave way to rusted fences, cracked sidewalks, and graffiti-tagged underpasses. She hadn't expected her truth to spill out like that. But maybe it was never supposed to stay in. At the next red light, her phone buzzed. "Grandpa. Can I come see where you live?" Just 6 words, but they weighed more than any apology ever could. She hesitated for a beat, then typed back, "If you really want to." 30 minutes later, she stood at the edge of the crumbling stone steps that led down to the basement she'd called home for nearly 4 years. Her palms were sweaty, not from embarrassment, she was long past that, but from the rawness of what she was about to reveal. A car door slammed, footsteps, and then there he was. Walter stood at the curb in a dark overcoat, holding a paper bag of pastries. His face was more solemn than she had ever seen it. He nodded once, saying nothing, waiting for her lead. She turned, unlocked the rusty gate, and descended. The basement door creaked open with a reluctant groan. A dull, flickering overhead bulb cast yellow light across the cluttered space. The air smelled of old smoke, damp concrete, and something vaguely metallic. "Welcome to the palace," Isabella said dryly, gesturing with a sweeping arm. Walter stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes scanned everything: the mattress wedged between a laundry machine and a crooked bookcase, the stained ceiling tiles, the duct tape covering a cracked window pane, and the tiny heater humming faintly in the corner. He didn't speak. Not yet. Finally, he sat down on the edge of her bed. It creaked beneath his weight. He stared at the floor. "This is what you've been living in," he said, barely above a whisper. Isabella nodded. "Since college ended, this is it." He swallowed hard. "I thought you were building your own life. I thought your father told me you wanted to be independent, that you turned it down. I believed him." She looked away, jaw tightening. "I asked him once for help finding a job, just a lead. He said, and I quote, 'Try flipping burgers, builds character.'" Walter's shoulders sank. He rubbed a hand across his face, the way people do when regret hits deeper than they can admit out loud. "He told me you thanked him for the apartment," he murmured, "that you were ungrateful but finally figuring it out." Isabella let out a soft, bitter laugh. "I didn't even know I was supposed to be grateful." A silence stretched between them, but this one didn't suffocate. It witnessed. Then, unexpectedly, Walter stood. His back was straight. His voice, when it returned, had lost the tremble. It had turned into something sharper, steel. "We're going to the bank in the morning," he said. "And after that, my lawyer. I want every transfer traced, every lie on record." Isabella looked up, startled. He met her eyes with a fire she hadn't seen in years. "If what you say is true, and I believe it is, then your father didn't just lie to you. He stole from both of us." Isabella didn't smile, but something inside her shifted, like the damp walls around her heart had finally cracked, letting light in for the first time in years. The next morning, Chicago was still waking up when Isabella and her grandfather arrived at First Central Bank. The sky was a pale gray. Rain had dusted the sidewalks, and everything smelled like cold stone and distant thunder. Isabella pulled her coat tighter around herself, the nerves creeping in again. Not because she feared what they'd find, but because she already knew. Walter had called ahead, pulled every string he still had from his days as a city engineer. When they walked into the bank's marble lobby, the receptionist already had their names. A quiet woman in her 50s, buttoned-up blouse, dark-rimmed glasses, escorted them to a private office in the back. "Mr. Grant?" She nodded politely, then glanced at Isabella. "Miss?" She sat behind a desk that gleamed with polished wood and ordered records to load on her screen. "It'll just take a moment," she said, typing swiftly. Isabella's hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her grandfather sat beside her, straight-backed, eyes fixed on the monitor. Then, "I do see the transfer," the woman said at last. "May 2019, from Walter Grant to Martin Grant. Note, for Bella's apartment, graduation gift." She turned the monitor toward them. The amount stared back like a ghost, $65,000. Isabella exhaled slowly, not with relief, but confirmation. Walter's voice was low. "And did that money go toward a property in her name?" The woman clicked again. "No," she said flatly. "In fact, 5 days later the funds were moved again, into a private investment account, still under Martin Grant. There's no mention of your granddaughter's name anywhere." Silence thickened the room. Isabella stared at the screen, fists curling in her lap. Her stomach burned, not with shock but fury, cold and sharp. Walter leaned forward slightly. "Can I get a printed copy of all that?" "Yes, sir." When the woman left to prepare the paperwork, Isabella turned to her grandfather. "He didn't just forget. He didn't misplace it. He hid it." Walter's jaw tightened. "He took what was meant to be your beginning and used it to build his own future." There was something different in his voice now, a finality, the quiet fury of a man betrayed not once, but twice. "You believed him," Isabella said, not accusing, just acknowledging the ache of it. "I did," Walter admitted, "because I thought, surely no father would steal from his own daughter, but I was wrong." The woman returned with a manila envelope and placed it gently on the desk. "Everything's in here," she said. "Transaction history, notes, authorizations." Walter took it with both hands, then looked at Isabella. "This isn't just family drama anymore," he said. "It's theft." She nodded, her voice was low but unwavering. "Then let's stop pretending it's anything less." He stood. "Come on, we've got one more stop to make." They walked out into the rain, the envelope clutched tight in Walter's hand like a verdict. They weren't just gathering proof anymore. They were building a reckoning. It had been 4 years since Isabella last stepped foot inside her childhood home. And yet, as she stood at the front porch of the 2-story brick house in Oak Park, everything looked unchanged. Same flower pots by the door, same wind chimes her mother insisted were soothing, same blue doormat that used to read welcome but had long since faded to well. Only this time she wasn't coming in quietly. Walter stood beside her, the manila envelope tucked under his arm, his face unreadable, but his posture told a different story. This wasn't a visit. This was a mission. He rang the bell. It didn't take long. The door opened to reveal Martin Grant, Isabella's father, wearing a golf polo in confusion. His eyes flicked from Walter to Isabella. Dad, Bella, what are you— We need to talk, Walter cut in. Martin's smile stiffened. Now's not a good time, I have— Sit down, Walter said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Something in it made the air around them shift. Inside, Isabella noticed her mother hovering in the kitchen, wiping a perfectly clean counter. Her sister peeked down from the stairs, sensing tension like a dog senses a storm. They all gathered in the living room. Walter placed the envelope on the coffee table with slow, deliberate care. Martin didn't look at it. Instead, he sank back into the armchair like he was bracing for something he already knew was coming. I trusted you, Walter began. I gave you $65,000, my savings, my gift to your daughter. You told me she got it. You told me she was thriving. Martin opened his mouth, but Walter raised a hand. Not now. She's been living in a basement, Walter continued, working 2 jobs, eating on the floor, paying rent in cash to a woman who doesn't believe in banks. Martin let out a nervous chuckle. Dad, you're blowing this way out of proportion. No, Isabella said sharply. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Don't lie again. You told me I was entitled, that I didn't deserve help. Meanwhile, you were living off money meant to give me a start. Her mother gasped, but no one moved. Walter opened the envelope and slid the printed bank statements across the table. I've already spoken to my attorney, he said. We're prepared to take legal action, but I'm giving you one opportunity to do the right thing. Martin looked at the papers, at the numbers that had turned into weapons, and didn't speak. His jaw tensed, his throat bobbed, but he said nothing. You'll repay every cent, Walter added, within 6 months, and you'll explain yourself, in front of the family, at next week's brunch. The room held its breath. No more pretending you're the generous, noble father. No more stories, just truth. Martin finally found his voice, but it wasn't strong. And if I don't? Isabella stood, taller now, not physically, but something in her had grown. Then you'll lose more than money. You'll lose the one thing you never gave me, your legacy. Her mother whispered, Martin, please tell me this isn't true. He lowered his head, said nothing, didn't deny it, didn't fight, just crumbled. Walter turned to Isabella and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You're moving in with me next week, he said. I've already called the realtor. We'll find you a proper place, with windows. She looked at her father one last time, and for the first time in her life, he couldn't meet her eyes. It was the same restaurant. Same table near the windows, same white linen, same gold-rimmed plates and polished silver forks, but this brunch was anything but the same. Isabella sat beside Walter this time, at the head of the table, not shoved between a wobbly chair and a champagne bucket. Her back was straight, her breath steady, her hands didn't shake. She didn't need to reclaim her place at the table anymore. She was the table now. One by one, the family arrived, aunts with polite smiles, uncles in sports coats, cousins pretending they weren't texting under the table. There was tension in the air, an invisible thread connecting every glance and every pause. They all knew something was coming. Then Martin walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair unruly, jacket slightly wrinkled, the usual easy charm drained from his face. Beside him, Isabella's mother was tight-lipped. Her sister wore sunglasses indoors. Walter stood up slowly, the hush falling over the table like a curtain. I won't keep you long, he began, voice clear and measured. But I invited all of you here today, because last week I learned a truth that shook me more than any medical diagnosis or missed birthday. The chatter died, even the waitstaff froze mid-pour. I gave a gift to my granddaughter Isabella, he said. A graduation gift, a gesture of belief in her future. $65,000, transferred to her father with clear instructions to help her start her life. His hand reached into his blazer and pulled out a folded paper. I was told she received it, that she was doing well, thriving even. He paused, looked around the table. That was a lie. Murmurs rippled like a wind over water. One aunt gasped. A cousin stopped chewing mid-bite. Walter turned toward Martin. He took that money, invested it under his name, let his daughter live in a basement with mildew on the walls, and worse, he made her believe she was the failure. Isabella kept her gaze steady, even as a lump formed in her throat. He told her she didn't deserve help, that she had to build character. Meanwhile, he built his portfolio. Walter laid the letter flat in front of Martin. Read it, he said, out loud. Martin looked at the paper like it was a burning coal. But with every eye in the room on him, he had no choice. His voice cracked as he read, I, Martin Grant, took funds meant for my daughter's future and used them for personal gain. I acknowledge this action was dishonest and harmful. I will repay the full amount within 6 months. I accept full responsibility for the damage caused. When he finished, the room held a breathless silence. No applause, no gasps, just stillness. Isabella didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She had waited years for this moment, not for revenge, but for truth to finally have a seat. Walter turned back to the family. From this day forward, Martin will have no authority over my estate. Every asset, every trust, every transaction, restructured, permanently. Martin lowered his head. Walter sat back down, placed his hand gently over Isabella's. And for the first time in her adult life, she felt seen. Not as a disappointment, not as a shadow, but as someone who had survived the silence and made it speak. The new apartment wasn't huge, but to Isabella it felt like a castle. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling golden warmth across the hardwood floors. There were no water stains on the ceiling, no boiler growling beside her bed, no scent of mildew or cigarette ash in the air, just silence and peace. She stood by the window on her first morning, holding a cup of coffee, barefoot on clean floors that didn't creak under every step. She could see the skyline from here, buildings rising like promises in the distance. She smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time, nothing was hidden. Walter had insisted she take the place. Just until you're truly on your feet, he said. But Isabella knew this was more than a gift. It was a key out of the dark. Later that week, she opened an old laptop and clicked into a dusty folder she hadn't dared to open in years. The label on it read, "Designs do not delete." Inside were sketches, room layouts, tiny apartments turned into art. A teenage version of herself had dreamed of becoming a space designer, someone who made beauty out of small, forgotten corners. But somewhere along the line, she had started believing that forgotten corners were where she belonged. She stared at the sketches, then she opened a blank page, and started again. By the end of the week, she had uploaded a small online portfolio, applied to 3 local design studios, set up a profile on a freelance network. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning. A month passed. Then one Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang. It was a mid-sized architectural firm launching a new urban renewal initiative. They'd seen her submissions. They wanted someone who understood how to maximize space, someone who could design with empathy. Isabella laughed on the call. "I've lived that," she said. "Believe me, I know." The following Monday, she walked into their office wearing the same beige coat her mom once called childish. The creative director offered her a seat. The contract was signed by noon. It wasn't just a job. It was proof. Proof that she had never been the failure her father painted her to be. That living in a basement didn't mean she belonged beneath anyone. Months later, she hosted brunch in her own apartment. No restaurant, no borrowed space, real plates, fresh flowers, laughter that didn't sound forced. Her cousin, the one who once rolled her eyes when Isabella talked about art, now leaned in to ask about color palettes. Her aunt complimented the lighting. Her mother didn't come, neither did her father. That was fine. Because sometimes absence is the clearest piece of all. Walter brought pastries. He placed them in a ceramic dish Isabella had bought with her first paycheck. "This," he said as he looked around the sunlit room, "this is what I imagined." Isabella touched his hand gently. "Me too." And as the brunch carried on around them, with warmth, with truth, with nothing left unspoken, Isabella looked out her window again. This time she didn't feel like she was looking up at the world. She was part of it. Finally, sometimes the hardest battles are the quiet ones. The ones where you're not screaming, you're simply standing. Isabella didn't fight to be applauded, she fought to be seen. And in doing so, she reminded us all, you don't have to stay in the dark just because someone else is afraid of your light. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. What would you have done in her place? And if you haven't already, subscribe, share, and help us keep telling stories that deserve to be heard. Because somewhere out there, someone else is still sitting in silence, and your share might be the window they've been waiting for.